friends. I'm Professor Rajagopalan Srinivasan with the Department of Chemical Engineering here at IIT Madras. It gives me great pleasure to welcome you all to the inauguration of the American Express Lab for Data Analytics, Risk and Technology. We call it the DART Lab. The number 2020 is usually associated with clear sight and wisdom. This year, 2020, has also brought us some new and interesting insights, especially about risk. Risk and uncertainty obviously has always been a part of the human condition. And for at least 4,000 years, since the time of Hammurabi, we have developed various means to tackle them. In each branch of engineering and in all walks of life, we have developed our own tools and techniques, be it process safety area, very close to my heart, where one tries to handle flammable chemicals, say in an oil refinery, or modeling the risk of default when offering credit in the financial services industry. These domain-specific tools have clearly served us very well for many, many decades. However, over the last few years, across domains, we are now realizing that these approaches to risk seem to increasingly come short, especially when technology intersects with us humans. Studies show that at least 70 to 80% of all accidents or undesired outcomes across various domains is induced by a human. It could be an air traffic controller directing planes in the sky. It could be a motorist on our roads. It could be a control room operator in a manufacturing plant, or it could be a data analyst training a machine learning algorithm. In other words, when we deal with situations where people have to work together with sophisticated technology, our handle on risk is really at an infancy. This is the motivation for establishing the DART Lab. The research at DART Lab will focus on this human dimension of risk. The overarching goal is to develop a science-based understanding of humans' strengths and weaknesses in different contexts and engineer technologies to best manage risk. Naturally, we will tap on our understanding of the cognitive and behavioral sciences, leverage on our strength in data analytics, AI, and related technologies, and address challenges across various verticals, including manufacturing, healthcare, finance, transportation, power, etc. The DART Lab obviously will develop a cutting-edge research and new technologies, but will also educate students and practitioners, disseminate knowledge through conferences, workshops, etc. And we also hope to help decision makers in government and society best navigate these complex times. That's clearly much to be done, and obviously no one small group of people can do it all. We will therefore work very closely with partners and collaborators to achieve these goals. We are particularly delighted today that American Express has stepped ahead right at the inception of the DART Lab to support this initiative. To speak about this collaboration between Amex and IIT Madras, let me invite the prime mover behind the partnership, our Dean for Alumni and Corporate Relations, Professor Mahesh Jagnula.
Thank you, Raj. Good evening, good afternoon, good morning to all. I think it's a delight to be here. We've come a long way, like Bharat was just mentioning, from the time we first started talking about creating a lab like this. I'm absolutely delighted that this is figured into a really two-way beneficial long-term partnership. And that's when I look at this, when I look at the start of this partnership, I think it has long-term written all over it. And I have good vibes that this is going to really deliver on all of the promises that we've made to each other. A cross-cutting the lab in the sense of a technical, in the sense of a technology that underlies several different aspects of engineering is a very necessary approach in today's world. As scientists, we rely on math quite a bit to understand the world around us, and that language of mathematics has a lot of commonality between risk associated with, let's say, a driver driving a car, financial risk of someone, defrauding a credit option, or a chemical plant experiencing some form of an accident. So the idea of this lab is to bring all of these disciplines into one place, to let them congregate, to let them discuss the idea of risk in their respective languages, and thereby enriching the lab and its working. While we are starting this off today as the American Express Data Analytics Risk and Technology Lab, I am sure in due course of time, this lab will attract industry interest from many different sectors, including chemical processing, transportation, and many others. While the lab will continue to remain Amex Lab, I'm sure it will morph into a nice oasis where all of us can come and quench our thirst. I wish the lab a great success in this endeavor in times to come. I will be remiss in my duty if I do not thank the two people who championed this, persevered through very difficult times to get us to see this day. I want to first thank Bharat and Shankara for their perseverance, their ideation, their vision to bring this lab to IIT Madras. I want to thank them, and we will continue to strengthen this partnership to make it a real long-term committed affair between the two of us. In many ways, this is going to be a mutually beneficial relationship, and I wish the lab and its students all the best and all the success in times to come. Thank you.
You know, even a driver driving a bus in Indian traffic, and in other roles now, as Raj was mentioning, in a manufacturing setting and so on. We are making the job productivity of the individual so high by feeding so many sensory inputs, measurements, signals, and firing the person up pretty much, that obviously the risk associated with human failure becomes that much higher now. In another lab, it just reminded me while I was listening that another lab of the institute, we have a faculty member who makes seats for drivers with all kinds of sensors on them, and things that hang in front of the driver, looking into his eyes and so on, just to try to see when whether any risk associated with the early detection of fatigue can be mitigated and accidents prevented. So this kind of thing, because the kind of, if you see the console in front of the driver now, it looks like a cockpit. So everything's very useful to the driver, but the pressure on the driver in some sense is so much higher now. So this is happening in all roles, and I think this interface, the intersection of the human factors with these new technologies that the human being is working with 24/7 in delivering their goal is becoming a very difficult, challenging area. And I think this lab vision is very, very broad, and anything is possible. All depends now on the students and the faculty involved, and I hope to see some great stuff come out of this lab. And therefore, I'm very, very happy that Amex is it's very, very, for my student base, I remember that company that stands out. When I was in the US, stood out in the firmament of all companies. You could see it, you could hear about it. You couldn't miss it. And I'm really happy to see American Express actually bringing forward its support for this lab. And also, along with that, in that context, these scholarships, particularly for women. We are doing all we can to increase the participation of women in not just STEM, but in IT. We have increased the intake of women at the undergraduate level 20%. People like Bharat, who from earlier days will remember, it was very, very, very minuscule. But we actually have gone from 14 to 20% by a proactive set of steps in the last 3 years across the IIT system. Fortunately for us, the participation of women at the PhD level is already pretty good. It's 30%. That is driven by the much better ratio of women in the engineering enrollment in rest of the engineering education system, which is a feeder for many of our PhD programs. So it turns out that now if we fix our undergraduate ratio, I think we'll be doing good. We still have some ways to go in increasing the fraction of faculty. And that has to do with the entire feeder process. It will happen, I'm sure. And these scholarships, therefore, especially the ones that encourage women to take up careers in STEM, go for higher degrees, and then hopefully for a PhD and so on. These are the important awards and scholarships. So I'm very, very glad that Amex has come forward to create these and support these. We really look forward to a long-term partnership, not just in terms of grant support, but more in terms of the research itself. Amex is always at the cutting edge of many things associated with nowadays, I'm sure, with analytics, but even from earlier days or with risk and the use of technology. So DART is just right for them. So I really look forward to a partnership between Amex and our lab, DART lab, and the faculty involved and the students. I'm sure some of them will get a chance to intern, and many more will find it fruitful to join American Express for a career and seal this partnership and make it even stronger. So I really congratulate everybody involved and look forward to great work, great results coming out of this collaboration. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you, Professor Bhaskar. Now, can I request you to declare the lab open?
Yeah, I will. I'm quite happy to cut the virtual ribbon. So the lab is open if there is a... Okay. All right. I'm looking out for papers coming out of DART lab. Thank you.
Okay, for now we move on to a small little video about IIT Madras. So Bharat probably would remember the greenery, which has always been a hallmark of this campus. So what this video will show you, give you an overview of the campus and also locate the DART lab in that sense. Okay, so thank you, Mr. Kannan. So with that,
very good graphics, Raj.
Yeah, well, graphics, but I think some of it is also real, not just virtual.
Very nice. Brings back memories.
Excellent.
Yeah, it's not a deep fake. Yeah.
So can I now invite Mr. Shankara Narayanan, VPMD, Credit and Fraud Risk Center for Excellence at American Express India to say a few words about the Amex IITM collaboration.
Hi, Raj. Thank you so much. So I think Raj already gave me an introduction. So Shankara Narayanan, I've been heading up this CFR, or Credit and Fraud Risk Center of Excellence in Gurgaon for the last couple of years. And I've been back in India 3 years. Prior to that, I was in New York for about 19 years or so. I also want to recognize a couple of other colleagues that have joined us today. I have Jayatu Chowdhury. He heads up a similar center of excellence we have called Enterprise Digital and Analytics. And then I also have Manish Gupta with me. He's actually in my team heading up the machine learning and AI lab that we have located in Bangalore. One colleague who could not join is Ruchika Panasar, and she heads up the technology teams in India. So between us, we cover data analytics, risk, and technology. Firstly, let me say it's a big privilege for me to be here at this event today. both personally and in my capacity as a representative of Amex today on this event. I am a Chennaiite by birth, as well as by origin. In fact, my father still lives in Tiruvannur, which is only about a 10-minute ride away from the back entrance of IIT. I did not have the privilege of attending IIT. JEE was too much for me, but a whole lot of classmates of mine were in IIT Madras. And I very, very fondly remember that many days I spent at the IIT Madras campus. Whenever I was in Chennai, I used to go over and visit them and have spent many a lot of time there. But I always felt immensely proud that IIT Madras, which right now is India's #1 engineering and technology institutions by most rankings, that it was located in my hometown. So, and also close to my home. So that was always a point of pride for me. So when Bharat reached out to me last year after his interaction with Mahesh at an alumni event, I think in New York, regarding potentially pursuing some research opportunities with IIT Madras, we were only too happy to explore it. It was actually a pleasant surprise also in the process. I learned that Mahesh, Bharat, and I were all at Purdue University, all at the same time in the 90s. Bharat and I obviously knew each other from school. We were actually classmates in the same management school, but I was not aware that Mahesh was also there at the same time. So that was a pleasant surprise. And it was
Raj as well.
Oh yeah, Raj as well. That's right. So it was great to get to know them after all these years. The world is still a very, very small place. And then we heard from them as well as Professor Ravi also. We had some conversations when I visited the campus, along with Professor Nandan as well, who I met. And we heard from them their need for funding research in several areas, all the way from health to also potentially extending to verticals like retail and financial services, with a strong motivation also to create a positive societal impact. So that was a big thing that American Express was also striving for. And it so happens that I also am a member of the CSR committee of American Express. So if you put that together, then it was relatively a straightforward process for me to then work with our committee to see if we can allocate some of the CSR funds we have to forming an enterprise towards research and creating positive societal impact. And in addition, our Amex colleagues, they're also very, very deeply interested in supporting educational initiatives, and we have a lot of them going on in India right now, funded by our CSR activities, and in particular within that, funding education for girl children. So putting it all together, from there it was a matter of putting all these pieces together, and here we are today, right? So we are extremely also grateful for the gesture from IIT to name not only the lab after American Express, and I like the name. DART seems to convey energy and action. So hopefully a lot of productive research will come out of that. And we have also made a multi-year commitment, and I therefore look forward to all of the research that will come out of this initiative and the positive impact that it will have. Just ironically, we have the most powerful display of systemic risk in our lifetimes going on right now with this COVID crisis, which has pretty much impacted almost every aspect of life across the entire globe, right? So Bill Gates was smart enough to see this coming 5 years ago and warned us we were not prepared. But anyway, that day is here when we are seeing systemic risk at this scale. So although highly ironic, I'm going to take that as an auspicious sign that we are setting up our lab with a motive of studying risk during a time when we have this big risk event going on. So anyway, I will close by just saying I wish all the folks that are involved now already in this enterprise, as well as going to be involved, faculty, students, and all other researchers from both inside and outside of IITM and Amex that will participate. I wish them all the best towards producing great research and driving a lot of benefits for the broader community around us. I'll just close by thanking in particular a number of individuals, Professors Mahesh, Raj, Nandan, Ravi, and also Professor Bhaskar for inaugurating today, for collaborating with us in making this a reality today. And very, very happy to be here, very privileged to be here. So thank you for giving me a few minutes to speak. Thank you. I hand it back.
Thank you, Shankara. Thank you very much. We have a small token of appreciation for Bharat and Shankara. May I request Professor Bhaskar to virtually hand it over at this point, and obviously FedEx will deliver an actual physical copy of that in the coming days.
What is it that I'm delivering?
Well, you'll see it in a minute. So our
Right, good. Thanks. I'm happy to hand this over to Bharat and Shankara. It will be delivered to you shortly.
Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Bhaskar, and I'm appreciative of the color choice. I think it matches closely my background. Thank you.
I
Appreciate
guess
it.
there'll be another company that will be very happy with the name of the lab and the color you've chosen. That's Blue Dart.
Sure.
Did not think of that.
Sure. Now,
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
thank you. And I would request my co-head, Professor Nandan Sudashanam, to deliver a note of thanks.
Great. Thank you so much, Raj. And genuinely, being involved with this end to end and right through the glitch of COVID has meant a lot. The kind of commitment we've seen, the kind of picking up the pieces that we've seen, and the entire interest and commitment from both sides, particularly from the Amex side as well as from the IIT Madras side, where we've really come together and said, let's move along and work along. And so, starting from the entire team on the Amex side, Bharat, Shankara, Siddesh, Manish, where everyone contributed. And I know in between from both sides, legal got involved with the nitty gritty and the fine print, but we stuck together, we stuck and worked through everything. And that's how an organization on both ends, I really feel, should work to create something so beautiful. And of course, I can't go without thanking the support all the way from Professor Bhaskar, Professor Mahesh, and the sister organizations that we're looking to partner with, like the Robert Bosch Center for Data Science and AI, and in that capacity, Professor Ravi, and Raj, as he stepped up as the head and really said, let's put this together and creating a team within IIT with a focused goal. So even all the other colleagues who are involved, who are looking to be involved, who have in the first round have been given projects. We've run a course, and where we've said what kind of projects would we like to do with this. And so I really thank them all for the involvement and the sincerity that has come through with this. Before I kind of jump in, Raj, would we be introducing the next speaker at this point, or?
Yeah, so I think so this kind of brings to a close the formal inauguration ceremony. We will now transition to a technical talk. So again, thanks everybody for today's morning session.
Bharat, thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Before everyone goes, I do want to just say one more thing. Shankara, you stole the words out of my mouth when you brought the COVID thing up. But I do wanted to add, you spoke about how we're in a phase of systemic risk. We're also here at a phase of a behavioral science problem, right? You have performance
Absolutely.
behavior, you have reaction to behavior, you have anger to policy. So it's not only a biology problem. This is a human behavior problem that we are also facing with. And so if I think of DART as being in the nexus of risk and human behavior, I couldn't think of a more relevant time to be doing this. So again, thank you. And
Yeah. And
let's not
therefore,
add
it's
those two
auspicious.
cents. Absolutely.
Bye, Bharat.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. So the rest of the inauguration event consists of a series of lectures. We'll start with one lecture today, followed by a series of 3 lectures tomorrow. So to introduce the first speaker, I invite Professor Nandan.
Thanks again, Raj. It gives me great pleasure. Greg, I don't think we've personally met, but just looking at your profile, sincerely, it's like almost it's scripted in terms of what DART is trying to do and what your history has been. So for the rest of the folks who are joining us, Greg A. Jameson is a professor and Clarice Chalmers Chair in Engineering Design in the Department of Mechanical and Industrial Engineering at the University of Toronto. Here he directs the cognitive engineering lab. Greg's research focuses on human automation, interaction in safety critical systems, and particularly in process industries. So I know that does not do complete justice to Greg's full bio, but I'm hoping that he can take it away and really tell us and inform us a little bit more about what he does and his interests. Thank you, Greg.
Thank you very much for that introduction, and greetings this morning from Toronto, Canada, and greetings to you in the evening for those of you who are in India. It's a pleasure to be invited to speak to an activity like the one that you're embarking on. Much of our research in Canadian engineering laboratories is done through partnership with industry. And I recognize how challenging it can be to establish those partnerships, to get through the finding the mutual interests and reaching agreements about what to do with intellectual property. It takes a great deal of effort to pull this off. And I congratulate Amex and IIT Madras for having pulled off this relationship. And I wish you the best of luck. Godspeed in all of your endeavors together. So I also wanted to share with you that by coincidence, although most of you are far away, I actually live about 100 meters from what we call Little India in Toronto. So I actually feel a bit closer to you than maybe you expect. And that I live in the neighborhood that you might come to visit if you come to Toronto. So. If you ever do that, please do look me up. I'd be happy to show you around my neighborhood, which probably would look very familiar to many of you. So I will try to launch my presentation now here.
And Greg, while you're doing that, I just wanted to let all the speakers, yourself and some others who will be speaking tomorrow as well, and faculty know that this is being streamed on YouTube Live, and so most of the participants are accessing it through that channel. And what we have here particularly is just a small group. And so again, this is reaching a fairly large audience, and we're excited about the content and reach.
Excellent. Well, it's very flattering to me to know that there are many people out there who are listening and hearing what I might give you to think about today. Can you confirm that you are seeing my presentation now? I'm seeing a couple of nods and thumbs up, which I appreciate that feedback. So I would like to talk to you today a little bit about what's going on with human automation interaction research and where some of the challenges are going forward. Talk about one particular challenge. So I'll jump right in here and point to what I think are some of the guiding questions. It's a real pleasure for me to know that a research institute that is starting out is interested in the intersection of behavioral and engineering sciences, because I believe that my experience would point to the assertion that technology is far more effective when it's conceived and designed with the idea that people who are social creatures and behavioral creatures will take up that technology and use it to greater or lesser effect. So some of the guiding questions that guide our work and that I hope might guide your work relate to how people use technology to make decisions. And specifically for you, how will people use data and risk analytic technologies to make decisions? And how does that guide our choices about how we design those technologies? Because in fact, those technologies through our design have to make use of the people that they are both meant to serve and from whom they draw data and guidance for their use. So I'd like to introduce this image, which is a way of pointing out that in fact, engineers face a very, very difficult problem in technology design. And that's the problem of knowing and understanding that the world can be described in physical and mathematical terms. The challenge for engineers, very often who aren't given any training in behavioral science, is to divorce their understanding of how the world works from physical and mathematical perspectives and embrace the way that people actually experience the world, which is actually not through the explicit understanding of physics and mathematics. So although Snell's law will explain to us how a prehistoric person is able to target a fish underneath the surface of the water, it does not mean, in fact, that the prehistoric person understands Snell's law. And so how does this understanding lead us to make decisions about design? So now I'm particularly concerned in my work with problems, what we think about as being problems with automation. And these problems all arise from this difficulty of matching the way that engineers and technologists think about technology with the way that people experience technology. And so these are some of those selected problems, one of them being insufficient feedback. So we don't tell people enough about what the automation is doing to help them keep up with it. That when we do things for people over an extended period of time, they lose the ability to do those things for themselves. That when we design technology with automation technology, we don't just replace the tasks that people do, we in fact change the nature of those tasks. And when we do that, people have cognitive responses, for example, inattention. They stop paying attention when a machine is doing something for them. They have emotional responses. The most widely studied of these is trust. So there's a concern with trust in automation, and the possibility that we don't trust automation enough, or the possibility that we trust automation too much. And then finally, social responses to automation, that there is a substantial body of behavioral science evidence that says that even though machines are not, in fact, agents, people respond to them as if they are agents. And that response, that social response to technology, in fact, grants agency to something that designers may not think that they're actually creating. So these are some of the many problems. You will have witnessed these in your observation of the world around you, the technical world around you. One clear example of this, an example of not providing enough feedback and not recognizing the effect of automation on skill degradation, would come from the Boeing 737 MAX accidents. And although this is a very, very deep set of events that led to these two costly and high loss of life incidents, come through decisions that were made by engineers not to provide information about automation to pilots, to tell pilots about a type of automation that had added to a flight control system, but also not to recognize that some pilots in parts of the world would not have the skills to recognize the flight control environment that they were in and respond appropriately. So there was an assumption that was made about the skill set of pilots who would be using this automation that pilots were not actually told about and were not provided any explicit information about in the cockpit. So one very tragic example there. Another one that is perhaps a bit closer to home for some of you is the concerns around automated driving, in particular what are often called autopilot systems. This is an example of a Tesla accident. You've heard about these incidents already. Essentially, what you have here is an example of a change in the tasks that drivers are expected to perform, and the perception amongst drivers of the tasks that they're expected to perform when a car is in auto drive. And so the expectation of these vehicle manufacturers is actually that the drivers will remain fully engaged in the driving task, just not performing the lateral and longitudinal acceleration and deceleration commands. But in fact, what we know is that if you don't have people do a task for an extended period of time, they stop paying attention to that task. And so that leads to these types of incidents, and then subsequent design decisions that have to be made about how we try to potentially capture and engage the attention of drivers when they're not engaged in the driving task. And that in and of itself questions the value of the automation. So Lex Friedman a few years ago wrote a paper called "Thank You for Being Late," where he offered this very simple graphic that I find very, very powerful, which is to suggest that people are able to adapt, but people are only able to adapt so much. We are biological evolutionary organisms. We don't change that quickly, and technology, in fact, changes very quickly. And we are now developing and designing technologies that exceed the ability of people to adapt. And so it is not any longer a plausible engineering approach to technology design to think that people will simply adapt to the technologies that we create. That's no longer plausible. So whereas before the caveman and Snell's law was merely just an interesting observation, it is now an engineering fact that our design constraints have to consider the possibility that people will not be able to adapt themselves to the technologies that we create. And so what are some of these challenges that we're facing? One of them is the classic problem of function allocation, or figuring out in the design process who does what. We know of two things that don't work. One is the substitution myth. We know that if you replace a function formerly performed by a person with a function that's performed by a machine, that substitution is not clean. It creates ripples in the intersection of that functionality with human functionality that create new tasks for people and new difficulties for the interaction. We also know that what we can't do is automate all of the things that we know how to automate and leave all of the remaining functions to the human to take care of, because we don't know how to automate them. We refer to that as the leftover principle. So we know those two approaches to design don't work. We know that reliability is understood very, very differently by engineers than it's understood or experienced by people. So we as engineers have been trained to create the highest reliability systems that we can, because that's what we do. That's how we measure our success. In fact, people don't need an additional fraction of a percent of additional reliability in the automated systems that they use, because people tend to treat something as being either reliable or unreliable. And the data show that above about 70% reliability of a decision support system, people can make use of that type of automation to make better decisions than they could on their own. So what that tells us is that perhaps focusing on small improvements in reliability is not the way to go in terms of where to invest our design effort in trying to improve joint human-machine decision-making. We know about the relationship between trust and reliance. So trust is an attitude that when people are placed in a position of risk, when they are susceptible to some bad outcome by turning over their agency to a piece of automation, if they don't trust it, they won't do it. And that leads to reliance decisions. They'll choose not to rely on automation sometimes that could perhaps help them, and they will choose sometimes to rely on automation that can't help them. And so we know that trust and reliance are significant concerns. Transparency and apparency. Some of you may be familiar with the XAI, Explainable Artificial Intelligence area of research, which is grappling with this issue that some AI applications, some machine learning techniques are simply not tractable. You cannot explain to a person how a decision is arrived at. And so that questions the long-held assumption that transparency, or what I prefer to call apparency, because transparency is used in two different ways, but the question of what you choose or can tell the human about what the machine is doing is a significant challenge. But the one I want to talk about a little bit sort of encompasses all of these issues, and that is what design metaphors we choose to adopt when we're creating new technologies for people to interact with. And the dominant metaphor over the last 4 decades has been the supervisory control metaphor, which is the idea that the human is in sort of the center of a system where you have a machine that is executing, in this case, they're listed as computers, that are executing certain functions, and the machine is following some supervisory instruction that is given by the human, who monitors the machines and and plans the machine behaviors, et cetera, et cetera. And so the human is very much in sort of the center of the supervisory control system. But Sheridan has pointed out, Sheridan, who came up with the metaphor himself, has pointed out that as automation gets more powerful, there's less and less for people to do, and that ultimately setting the objective function may be the one remaining task for the human operator as automation engulfs us. And what this implies is, if you see the subtle difference here in images, is that the human is actually removed from the center of the decision-making process and is actually placed way at the top. And there's a great deal going on that the human is unable to necessarily be directly involved in. And so again, that raises these questions of trust, reliance, what information we provide to the human, et cetera, et cetera. But there are other metaphors that are emerging in the human automation interaction space, and I'm going to tell you about those briefly. And we want those because the supervisory control metaphor struggles to get into a more a subtle and nuanced thinking about who does what, and getting away from this dyadic notion that either the human or the machine does something. We know that the metaphor has difficulty capturing the dynamics that are increasingly common in human automation interaction, and the difficulty capturing the social factors, which I'll talk about a bit in a moment. And this takes us back all the way back to the beginning, really, of human automation interaction work with the work of Paul Fitts and colleagues, who said all the way back in 1951, it's our conclusion based on what we know about human abilities, that as a rule, machines should monitor men and not vice versa. It's generally a bad plan to create a piece of technology that is that acts independently and then say that a human is responsible for monitoring that machine. Humans are no good at that, and in fact, these machines could actually be quite powerful in monitoring humans. That suggestion was brought up earlier. One of the earlier speakers talked about the development of car or bus seats that are instrumented in such a way to understand whether or not drivers are attentive, whether or not they're becoming fatigued or sleepy. This is an example, an excellent example of using technology to monitor humans to increase overall system performance. But I'll talk briefly about three different metaphors: automation as a team player, the human automation marriage, and human animal metaphors as other ways of thinking about how we design for these interactions. So the most common of these, automation as a team player, has been in the literature for a couple of decades now. And we recognize that very often we do want to think about humans and machines working together, automation working together to perform tasks. And to do that, we can look at the literature about humans and humans who get together to form collaborative teams to perform tasks. And we can come up with a list of things, as Klein and colleagues have done, to indicate what, in fact, people would have to do in order to collaborate together with the machine effectively. But we also know that making automation a team player in complex work settings has proven to be considerably harder to do than to imagine. In part because humans are not always completely transparent. It's difficult, and there's a great deal of variability amongst humans. So it's difficult to model these types of team interactions and to translate those models into engineering design. John Lee has offered another metaphor, the human automation marriage, which arises from the recognition that technology is increasingly social in its design. And even if it's not the intent of designers, that people tend to interact with automation increasingly as if it's social, because it gives off both surface and depth cues that suggest that, in fact, it's an agent. Right? We may design for an interaction that gives a lot of information about what the automation is doing, or we may put a face on the automation or have it speak to a human operator with a voice. But also it has depth cues, like it acts on its own, that it follows the types of decision-making paths that humans would follow, that it actually engages in etiquette following, right? It avoids interrupting people at the wrong time. So all of these things lead people to feel that they're interacting with something that's social, and then they tend to overuse their social responses to technology and expect the automation to behave more in a more human-like fashion, which eventually you reach the design limits of what that machine is capable of doing, and then you feel like you have a social breakdown with the automation. For anybody that's been involved in a partnership relationship in their lives, you know that these dynamics are not always linear, and they're not always reciprocal. And so there's work by Gottman in creating a general systems theory of marriage to point out that if you're in a male-female relationship, you may have had the experience on one side or the other of that the response to your effort is not necessarily proportional to your experience of that effort. And so if a husband does something positive, according to Gottman, that will have a small positive effect on the wife. But if the husband does something negative, that will have a much larger negative impact on the wife. However, vice versa, the husband tends to respond far more positively to even small positive efforts from the wife, and then to have less pronounced reactions to negative efforts from the wife. And so we can see how amongst this pair of agents, we very often misunderstand one another's intent and react disproportionately to other people's efforts. Now, of course, that's a very simple example. Ray has pointed out that there's a far more extensive dynamics going on. And this starts to, if you're an engineer now, you start to think about the challenges of designing for these dynamics, and the possibility that you could have this sort of description of your marriage leads you to think that a description of this nature would be very challenging to discover and design in a human automation interaction perspective. And it could very easily lead to these uncomfortable relationships between people and machines. A metaphor that I've developed along with some colleagues in Norway has been the Butler metaphor. So if you think about the classic depiction of the English butler in film and television, you're presented with an agent who supports a human, in this case a lord, and that agent is seen as being unobtrusive, being very efficient in its dialogue, avoiding conflict or contradiction, acting in a way that seems graceful and precise, loyal and discreet. And when it has to guide the human, does so by offering gently the obvious course of action. We can understand sort of some of these human-human relationships by looking at these common depictions, like Kazuo Ishiguro's Remains of the Day, where he talks about dignity, the ability of the butler to inhabit the professional role, to be unshaken by events, however surprising, alarming, or vexing. So essentially how the butler deals with a risk situation. And can that tell us something about how a machine can help us to deal with those types of situations as well? Also, how the butler acts as a chief of staff to direct the other agencies. So you can start to think about multi-layered agency and whether or not the human wants to interact directly with a coordinating agent like the butler, or to interact with all of the other agents in the automation functionality. Finally, I'll finish very quickly with Flemish's H metaphor, which stands for the horse metaphor. Flemish, a German researcher, has taken his own familiarity with horse riding to recognize that between people and working animals, there is a very subtle and well-developed relationship between those two agents. And so Flemish asks, can we think about the way that people control the behavior of a horse, for example, to the way we think about the way that people try to control or interact with the behavior of an automated vehicle, as an example. So I'll close by saying that as engineers, in fact, we choose a metaphor when we design. Whether we do this explicitly or implicitly, we do choose a metaphor. And too often, we as engineers choose the normative decision-making metaphor. We choose that idea that the human has in his or her head Snell's law, or the mathematical depiction that we're trying to capture in the technology that we're creating. We know that's not the case. So if as engineers, we continue to adopt that way of thinking, we're we're going to continue to design automation functionality that forces people to adapt to the way we create the automation. And we know the limits of that adaptation have already been exceeded. We could use behavioral economics. I haven't spoken about that today, but essentially the idea that humans are not rational animals, that they are predictably irrational. And we can use those insights to control the way or inform the way we design automation. We can look to put humans at the center of the automation, which is where a lot of human factors research is right now. And we could choose to adopt explicitly social metaphors to guide our thinking. So I'll finish by reminding you that the design of data analytics and risk analytic technologies, it is automation design, and that people are not normative decision makers. They have cognitive, emotional, and social responses to technology that if we ignore, they will compromise the efficacy of the systems that we're creating. And we have opportunities to develop new ways of thinking about this issue of co-agency in decision making. And my hope for you in your work in DART is that you will seize those opportunities to create these new ways of thinking about those relationships. And I hope that will lead you to a great deal of success in your work. So thank you very much for the opportunity to address you at the beginning of this very compelling research collaboration that you have with Amex.
Great. Thank you so much, Greg. If we have a few minutes, I just had one or two questions that I just wanted to throw out there. Raj, we have the time for that, right? Great. I get the note. Completely fascinating. Hits home and very insightful. And to some extent, it's also intuitive in its own way, right? Like we see this in our daily lives.
Yes.
And I can completely see how the marriage, the human automation and human machine marriage is riddled with complexities, is riddled with problems. But I'm going to take a slightly more of a devil's advocate position just to, get more order for everyone listening and to learn from this. What if we post this as a little bit of a technology problem? What if we post this? I'm sure many of you and yourself are aware of the whole uncanny valley problem, right, from the 1970s. For the benefit of some of the people listening here, it more specifically addresses the notion of affinity towards robot likeliness, how likable robots are, towards how human-like they are, and can that concept and it shows that to some extent as the technology gets better and better, there's an upswing, and then at some point it gets creepy.
Yes.
And it dips deeply, and then again scales up when it becomes almost nearly. And that's science fiction at some point, that almost nearly point. What if I kind of posed a lot of what you're saying as us being in the bottom of that uncanny valley, where the technology, which was an enabler, was great, and as it got better and better, it reached its peak. And now we're in the phase where we don't know how to give control and like it, and we're confused, and we're in the bottom. But at some point, that's going to start changing. I mean, would you subscribe to that view? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I do think that is a powerful way of thinking about this co-agency problem, that as we start to adopt these social responses to technology, we develop expectations. That intuition that you speak about leads us to develop expectations about how the other agent is going to behave and perform. And when it doesn't, it has disproportionately negative impacts. Go back to thinking about the marriage metaphor. It has disproportionately negative impacts on us. And so it's a huge challenge for engineers, because we're not necessarily intentionally creating technologies that are social, right? We're doing that almost unintentionally as we try to create more powerful functionality. I think that the way that we at the very least should be more cognizant of that valley, that engineers should be taught about that effect of their design, and but also recognize that there is another there's another peak on the other side of that valley, right? There's a new higher peak that's much higher. And so it's very much worth, and universities are the place to do this. It's very much worth the exploration to ask, well, how do we get beyond that? Does it need to be perfect? And I think I like the human animal metaphors because we have a long learned understanding of the capabilities and limitations of those agents. And we use them very, very effectively. And I think that can help us to see that we don't need technology, that we don't need an android, right? We don't need something that looks human, that we struggle to even find evidence that it isn't human. We don't need that in order to have an effective relationship with another agent. So I think the research question lies in this area, in this valley that I agree that we're in, is what depth and surface cues will push people into the valley, and what depth and surface cues will pull them back out. Right? I think that's what we need to be asking ourselves. Sorry, you're muted.
I'm sorry. No, no, that makes a lot of sense. If we just have 2 more seconds for one other very short question, how would you translate a lot of what you've spoken about to a slightly different field of? So you're looking at the human automated agent interface, but if you think of it as just pure insight generation for the human, or even complete control, right, where there is not much of an interface, but there's a decision-making agent that makes decisions and gives the decision. How much of what you're saying would still translate to that space?
Years ago, there was a phrase that was used in the process industries that was called lights out automation. It was the idea that you were going to be able to set up the factory and start it running, and then close the door and go home for a nice dinner with the family, and that no one would need to be there and no one would need to interact. What I challenge my students to do, this is one of the first exercises that I do when I teach human factors, is I challenge them to think of a technology that requires no human interaction. And anything that they come up with, I have always been able to say, a human needs to design for that to happen. A human needs to monitor that it's happening. A human needs to put it back on track when it gets knocked off track. A human needs to maintain it. A human needs to do something to it. And it's when you accept that as the almost certain reality, it doesn't make a lot of sense to spend a lot of time thinking about the automation that never needs to be attended to by a human. And so I acknowledge that in some ways these things are possible. I like to use the metaphor of the dishwasher. I have a dishwasher in my home. It washes the dishes for me. I never think about it as an automatic dishwasher, but of course it is. But I still have to, and it's one of the most automatic devices around me. But of course, I still have to load it and unload it and put the detergent in it to clean stuff. And every once in a while, I have to clean the filter of the stuff that's come off of the dishes that it's cleaned for me. So I use that as the example of it. It's a piece of automation. It works very, very well for the functionality that it performs. But I generally discourage people from thinking too much about the automation that we don't need to interact with, because I don't know where it is.
Great. Great, Greg. I think this has been very interesting. Thank you so much for joining us. I want to thank everyone who has joined us, and just note that we have a big session scheduled for tomorrow as well. Greg, I hope you can join us for that as well. We have speakers. We have 3 speakers starting at 6 p.m. tomorrow, Indian Standard Time. We have Konstantinos Katsikopoulos from University of Southampton. We have Manish Gupta from the Analytics Center at Amex that was introduced earlier in today's talk as well. And we have Professor Narayanan Srinivasan from the Indian Institute of Kanpur. And you can, I'll post a link on the WebEx channel, or actually I'll mention it since this is on YouTube Live. You can get details on our entire event at DART, that's DART.iitm.ac.in. And the event section, the entire plan for tomorrow is also available. So thanks again, Greg, and thank you all for joining us. Raj,
Thank you for the opportunity.
Greg, thank you so much. It was a great talk. Really
Thank you.
enjoyed it.
Okay. See
Best
you
of
all.
luck to you all.
Look
Thank
forward
you.
to
I think
joining you.
we'll continue our discussion.